The macabre history of the VarnersThey kept 14 children off-grid with no identity at all. The spring of 1997 found America at the height of the technology boom, with the internet connecting households across the nation and cell phones becoming commonplace even in rural communities. But in the remote wilderness of northwestern Montana, where the Glacier National Park boundaries fade into endless stretches of untamed forest, the Varner family existed in a bubble of complete isolation that made the 19th century seem recent. By comparison, the discovery of the Varner family's secret came through a confluence of natural disaster and bureaucratic necessity that would have been impossible in any other era. On May 10, 1997, an unusually late spring blizzard struck the northern Rockies, dumping 3 feet of snow across a region already saturated by weeks of heavy rain. The combination of snow load and waterlogged soil triggered a series of landslides throughout Glacier County, blocking roads, destroying bridges, and cutting off communication to dozens of remote homesteads. Montana Emergency Management Coordinator Sarah Hendricks found herself managing the largest search and rescue operation in the state's recent history. Satellite imagery and helicopter reconnaissance revealed the scope of the disaster. Entire valleys had been reshaped by the slides, and several communities were completely cut off from outside contact. But it was during this emergency response that authorities first encountered evidence of people living in areas where no people were supposed to exist. Helicopter pilot Jack Morrison, conducting aerial surveys of the damage, reported seeing structures and human activity in a valley that didn't appear on any official maps. The area, designated as uninhabited wilderness on all government charts, clearly showed signs of long-term human habitation: buildings, cleared fields, livestock, and what appeared to be a substantial homestead operation. When Morrison radioed the coordinates to Emergency Command, the response was confusion. According to Forest Service records, the area had been designated as protected wilderness since 1978, with no private property rights or legal habitation permitted. Yet Morrison's reconnaissance photos clearly showed a well-established settlement that appeared to have existed for years. The mystery deepened when authorities attempted to investigate the satellite imagery of the area. The settlement appeared in real-time reconnaissance photos, but historical satellite images showed no evidence of human activity in the same location. Either the homestead had been built recently with remarkable speed, or it had been constructed using techniques that made it invisible to overhead surveillance. Hendricks dispatched a ground team to investigate, but the landslides had made the area temporarily inaccessible by road. It would be 3 weeks before conditions improved enough to allow emergency responders to reach the mysterious settlement, and what they found there would challenge everything they thought they knew about how people could live in modern America. The team, led by Forest Service investigator Michael Chun and accompanied by Glacier County Sheriff Rebecca Martinez, followed what appeared to be an ancient hunting trail deep into the wilderness. The path showed clear signs of regular use, but had been carefully maintained to appear natural to casual observation. Fallen logs had been positioned to discourage vehicle access while allowing passage on foot. Stream crossings had been engineered to be invisible from aerial surveys, while providing reliable year-round access. After 6 hours of hiking through increasingly dense forest, the investigators emerged into a valley that seemed to exist outside of time. A substantial log house dominated the clearing, surrounded by outbuildings that included barns, workshops, storage facilities, and what appeared to be educational structures. Gardens and fields showed evidence of sophisticated agricultural knowledge, with crop rotation systems and soil management techniques that suggested years of careful development. But most striking was the complete absence of any modern technology or connection to the outside world. No power lines, no telephone cables, no radio antennas, no satellite dishes. The settlement appeared to be entirely self-sufficient, generating its own power through a combination of water wheels, wind generators, and solar panels that had been Disguised to blend with the natural environment, Chun and Martinez approached the main house with the caution of law enforcement officers who had learned to expect the unexpected in Montana's remote regions. The state's vast wilderness had always attracted people seeking to escape mainstream society, and previous encounters with off-grid communities had ranged from harmless eccentrics to dangerous extremists. The man who answered their knock appeared to be in his 50s, with the weathered appearance of someone who had spent decades working outdoors. He introduced himself as Thomas Varner and displayed no surprise at their arrival, as if he had been expecting government representatives for years. His wife, Catherine, appeared to be approximately the same age, with the calm demeanor of someone accustomed to unexpected visitors. When Chun explained their presence, investigating reports of unauthorized habitation in protected wilderness, Thomas's response revealed a sophisticated understanding of federal land use regulations and property rights law. He produced documents showing that his family had legal claim to the land through a pre-existing homestead right that predated the wilderness designation. The paperwork was complex but appeared authentic, demonstrating that the Varners had legitimate authority to live in an area that had subsequently been designated as uninhabited wilderness. But when Martinez asked about family members and the obvious signs of a larger household, she encountered responses that immediately triggered her law enforcement instincts. Thomas acknowledged that children lived on the property, but explained that they were being educated privately and had no need for government services or documentation. When pressed for details about the number, ages, and welfare of these children, both parents became evasive in ways that suggested they were hiding something significant. The investigators' training told them they were looking at a potential child welfare situation, but the legal complexities were unprecedented. The Varners appeared to have legitimate claim to their property. They had violated no obvious laws. Their homestead showed evidence of successful self-sufficiency and careful environment management, but the complete absence of any official documentation for what were clearly multiple children raised serious questions about their welfare and legal status. Martinez requested permission to conduct a welfare check on the children, but the Varners politely refused, citing religious beliefs and parental rights that they claimed protected them from government intrusion. They produced additional legal documents showing their understanding of homeschooling laws, religious exemption statutes, and constitutional protections for family privacy. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but it was resolved by the children themselves. As the adults spoke on the front porch of the main house, Martinez became aware of faces watching from windows and doorways throughout the settlement. Not just one or two children, but many, far more than would be typical for a single family. When Martinez asked directly how many children lived on the property, Thomas's answer shocked both investigators. 14 children, he said, ranging in age from 3 to 19 years old. All were healthy, well-educated, and happy. All were being raised according to the family's religious beliefs and commitment to self-sufficient living. And none, he admitted when pressed, had ever been registered with any government agency or documented in any official record. The implications of this admission were staggering. 14 children living their entire lives without birth certificates, social security numbers, medical records, or any other form of official documentation. According to every government database in the United States, these children simply didn't exist. Chun and Martinez found themselves confronting a situation that challenged the basic assumptions of modern child welfare and law enforcement. The children appeared healthy and well cared for. The parents seemed knowledgeable about child development and education. The homestead provided a level of security and self-sufficiency that exceeded what most American families enjoyed. But 14 children were living completely outside the legal and social systems designed to protect them, with no way to verify their welfare, education, or basic rights as American citizens. The investigators requested backup and spent the remainder of the day documenting what they could observe without entering the family's private property. What they saw challenged their preconceptions about off-grid living and child welfare. The children who appeared briefly in doorways and windows seemed alert, healthy, and appropriately dressed for the mountain environment. The educational facilities visible from public areas appeared well equipped with books, scientific instruments, and learning materials. But perhaps most disturbing was the children's behavior. When they noticed the investigators, rather than showing curiosity about strangers or attempting to interact, they quickly disappeared from view whenever they realized they were being observed. Their movements suggested they had been trained to avoid contact with outsiders, raising questions about what they had been taught about the outside world and their own place in it. As evening approached, Chun and Martinez faced a dilemma that highlighted the tensions between individual privacy and government oversight in modern America. They had discovered what appeared to be a thriving off-grid community that had successfully maintained complete autonomy for years. But they had also found 14 children who were living entirely outside the legal protections and social services that American society provided for young people. Question that would dominate the investigation for months to come was simple, but profound. Were these children being protected from a dangerous world, or were they being imprisoned in an isolated environment that denied them the basic rights of American citizenship? The answer would require a deeper investigation into the Varner family's background, their methods of maintaining complete invisibility from government surveillance, and the sophisticated systems they had developed to raise children who officially didn't exist in the United States of America. As Chun and Martinez prepared to leave the valley, they were watched by 14 pairs of eyes that belonged to children who had never seen strangers before, who had never been to a store or a school or a hospital, who had never interacted with anyone outside their isolated mountain community. Children who, according to every official record in the country, had never been born. The investigation that would follow would reveal how the Varner family had managed to maintain this impossible secret for nearly 2 decades, and what price those 14 children had paid for their complete separation from the modern world. But for now, as darkness fell over the Montana wilderness, the investigators could only wonder how many other hidden communities might exist in America's vast remote regions, and how many other children might be living invisible lives in the shadows of a society that had no idea they existed. The federal investigation that followed the discovery of the Varner settlement would ultimately expose the most sophisticated off-grid operation ever documented in the United States. FBI Special Agent Larva Davidson, who arrived in Glacier County on June 2, 1997, had extensive experience with survivalist communities and religious separatist groups. But the Varner case presented challenges that pushed federal law enforcement into uncharted legal and practical territory. The 14 children living in Montana wilderness represented something unprecedented in modern child welfare, a complete generation that had been systematically excluded from every aspect of American bureaucratic and social infrastructure. They had been born without medical assistance, educated without government oversight, and raised without any connection to the legal identity systems that define citizenship in the modern world. Agent Davidson's initial investigation focused on determining how the Varner family had maintained their invisibility for nearly 20 years. Financial analysis revealed that Thomas and Catherine Varner had disappeared from all official records in 1979, shortly after the birth of their first child. Prior to that date, both had been documented American citizens with normal Social Security numbers, employment histories, and tax records. But in 1979, they had simply vanished from the bureaucratic landscape while simultaneously acquiring the remote Montana property through a series of complex legal maneuvers that exploited gaps in federal land management policies. They had purchased their homestead using gold and silver coins that could not be traced through banking systems, and had established their settlement during a period when satellite surveillance was limited and government oversight of remote areas was minimal. The timing had been crucial to their success. The late 1970s represented a unique window in American history, when it was still possible for people to disappear completely if they understood how to exploit the gaps between different government agencies and record-keeping systems. The Varners had essentially stepped backwards in time, adopting a lifestyle that predated modern documentation requirements while using contemporary knowledge to maintain their invisibility. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a federal psychologist brought in to assess the children's welfare, made discoveries that complicated the simple narrative of child endangerment that many had expected. The 14 children, when finally interviewed under controlled circumstances, demonstrated levels of education, practical knowledge, and emotional stability that exceeded most children their age in mainstream society. They were fluent in multiple languages, proficient in advanced mathematics and sciences, and possessed practical skills ranging from mechanical engineering to organic agriculture. They had been taught philosophy, history, literature, and critical thinking at levels typically associated with college-level education. Most remarkably, they displayed none of the social dysfunction or psychological damage that experts would have expected from children raised in complete isolation. But Dr. Chun also discovered that the children's worldview had been shaped by a systematic indoctrination that made their integration into mainstream society extremely problematic. They had been taught that the outside world was corrupt, violent, and spiritually bankrupt. They believed that their isolation was protection rather than deprivation, and that their lack of official identity was freedom rather than disadvantage. The children genuinely viewed their invisible existence as a privilege that had been granted to them by parents who loved them enough to shield them from the contamination of modern society. They had been conditioned to see government documentation as a form of spiritual pollution that would compromise their purity and independence. Agent Davidson's investigation revealed that the Varner operation had been supported by a network of sympathizers who shared their beliefs about the corruption of modern society and the necessity of preserving traditional ways of life. This network included former military personnel, religious extremists, and political separatists who provided financial support, supplies, and expertise that allowed the family to maintain their complete self-sufficiency. The network had developed sophisticated methods for acquiring supplies without creating paper trails that could lead back to the settlement. They used intermediaries, cash transactions, and barter systems that allowed the Varners to obtain everything from medical supplies to educational materials without generating any records that would alert authorities to their location or activities. Most importantly, the network included medical professionals who provided healthcare to the children without creating any official documentation. The children had received regular medical care, including vaccinations and treatment for injuries or illnesses, but all of this care had been provided off the books by doctors and nurses who shared the family's commitment to avoiding government oversight. Financial analysis revealed that the Varner operation had been funded through a combination of gold and silver investments, cryptocurrency transactions, and income from crafts and agricultural products that were sold through the same underground network that supported their isolation. The family had developed a complete parallel economy that allowed them to participate in commerce without generating any traceable records. But perhaps most disturbing was Agent Davidson's discovery that the Varner children represented only the most recent generation of a multi-generational project. Investigation revealed that Thomas and Catherine Varner were themselves products of similar off-grid communities, raised by parents who had rejected mainstream society during the social upheavals of the 1960s. The couple had been systematically prepared for their role as guardians of invisible children, educated in the practical and ideological knowledge necessary to maintain complete separation from government oversight. They were true believers who genuinely thought they were providing their children with opportunities and protection that wouldn't be available in mainstream society. This discovery transformed the investigation from a simple case of child endangerment into something far more complex, an examination of whether alternative forms of childhood and education could coexist with American legal requirements for documentation and oversight. The children's own responses to questioning revealed the depth of this complexity. When asked if they wanted to remain with their parents or be integrated into mainstream society, they unanimously expressed preference for their current situation. They showed no interest in obtaining official documentation, attending conventional schools, or participating in the social activities that most American children took for granted. From their perspective, the outside world represented not opportunity, but contamination. They had been taught to view television, internet, popular culture, and consumer society as forms of spiritual pollution that would corrupt their minds and compromise their independence. They genuinely believed that their isolation had protected them from influences that would have made them less capable, less moral, and less free. Dr. Chun's psychological evaluations confirmed that the children were not suffering from obvious trauma or abuse, but they had been systematically conditioned to reject the fundamental assumptions of modern American society. Their integration into mainstream culture would require not rescue, but deprogramming, the systematic dismantling of a worldview that had been carefully constructed over their entire lives. The legal challenges were equally complex. The Varner parents had violated numerous federal laws by failing to register their children's births, obtain social security numbers, or comply with educational reporting requirements. But they had also provided their children with care, education, and opportunities that met or exceeded what most American children received. The children were healthy, educated, and emotionally stable. They lived in a secure environment with access to nutritious food, clean water, appropriate shelter, and comprehensive health care. They had been protected from violence, substance abuse, sexual exploitation, and the various dangers that threaten children in mainstream society. From a child welfare perspective, the fundamental question was whether official documentation and government oversight were essential for child protection, or whether alternative forms of family structure could provide equivalent or superior care without bureaucratic involvement. The case ultimately revealed the tensions between individual freedom and social responsibility that define modern American democracy. The Varner family had successfully demonstrated that it was possible to raise healthy, intelligent, capable children completely outside government oversight. But they had also denied those children the legal identity necessary to function as independent adults in American society. When the investigation concluded in late 1997, federal authorities faced an unprecedented decision. The children could be forcibly integrated into mainstream society, but this would require separating them from parents who had provided excellent care and placing them in a system they had been taught to fear and reject. Alternatively, the family could be allowed to continue their off-grid existence, but this would require federal authorities to acknowledge that American children could be raised outside the legal and social systems designed to protect them. The compromise that was eventually reached reflected the complexity of the situation and the impossibility of finding solutions that satisfied all parties. The Varner family was allowed to remain on their property, but they were required to register their children's existence with federal authorities and accept periodic welfare checks by social service agencies. The children were granted official documentation that would allow them to participate in mainstream society if they chose to do so as adults, but they were not required to attend conventional schools or abandon their family's lifestyle. Most importantly, the case led to changes in federal policies regarding off-grid communities and undocumented children. New protocols were established for situations where children were being raised outside conventional systems, but were not suffering obvious harm or neglect. The 14 Varner children, now adults in their 20s and 30s, represent a unique experiment in alternative child rearing. that challenges conventional assumptions about education, socialization, and the role of government in family life. Some have chosen to remain in off-grid communities, continuing the lifestyle they were raised in. Others have successfully integrated into mainstream society, using their unconventional education and practical skills to pursue careers and relationships in the documented world. But all of them carry the distinction of having been raised as invisible Americans, children who lived their formative years completely outside the systems that most people take for granted, and who must navigate the modern world with identities that were constructed rather than inherited. The Varner settlement still exists in the Montana wilderness, though it now operates with minimal government oversight rather than complete invisibility. The family continues to demonstrate that alternative approaches to child rearing can be successful, but they also serve as a reminder that the line between protection and isolation can be far thinner than most people realize. Their story raises questions that remain relevant today. How much government oversight is necessary to protect children? Can alternative forms of education and socialization provide equivalent preparation for adult life? And in an increasingly connected world, is it possible or desirable to raise children who exist outside the digital and bureaucratic systems that define modern identity? The macabre history of the Varners ultimately revealed that the most challenging forms of child welfare cases might not involve obvious abuse or neglect, but rather fundamental disagreements about the nature of childhood, education, and the role of family in society. Their 14 invisible children serve as living proof that it is possible to exist outside the systems that most Americans consider essential, but they also represent the costs and complexities of choosing such an existence. In a world that increasingly requires documentation for basic participation in economic and social life. Thank you for watching another tale unfold here on NW Storytime. Every story hides a secret, and tonight you uncovered another one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep the secrets alive. Until next time, stay curious.